Welcome to Truth Discovery. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. In a moment that will be studied for generations, the Supreme Court has delivered a historic blow to presidential authority, ruling 6-3 to sharply limit the president's power to impose tariffs for national security reasons, a power that, until now, had been wielded with broad discretion. This landmark verdict dismantles a key pillar of the America First trade doctrine, which allowed presidents to act swiftly and unilaterally on trade matters. Now the era of unpredictable president-led tariff actions appears to be over, replaced by a new demand for checks and balances. The decision reasserts Congress's constitutional role in trade, restoring legislative oversight that many felt had been eroded over decades. It forces a fundamental reset of American policy, sending shockwaves through the White House and prompting urgent discussions among policymakers and advisors. For years, tariffs have shaped prices for everyday goods, dictated the fate of businesses across the country, and influenced the choices of American families at the checkout counter. Now, the court's ruling brings both the promise of greater stability and the risk of new uncertainty, as lawmakers in the executive branch adjust to a dramatically altered landscape. Chief Justice Roberts wrote, "While the executive is not without power to act in the nation's interest, that power is not a blank check." His words echo a renewed call for accountability and transparency at the highest levels of government. The stage is now set for a high-stakes power struggle between Congress and the White House, as both branches seek to define their roles in shaping America's economic destiny. With the American economy hanging in the balance, the nation watches closely, aware that the consequences of this seismic shift will ripple through every household, business, and community for years to come. To truly grasp the impact of the Supreme Court's recent ruling, we need to look back at the dramatic transformation in U.S. trade policy that began under President Trump. His approach marked a sharp departure from decades of bipartisan consensus on free trade, setting the stage for a new era of economic confrontation and uncertainty. When Trump took office in 2017, he blamed free trade agreements for the decline of American manufacturing, arguing that they had shipped jobs overseas and hollowed out communities. He quickly made China and other major trading partners the focus of his aggressive new trade agenda, vowing to bring jobs back to the U.S. through sweeping tariffs and tough negotiations. Beginning in 2018, the Trump administration imposed tariffs on a wide range of imports, including solar panels, washing machines, steel, and aluminum. These actions were justified under a rarely used 1962 law, which allowed the president to restrict imports on national security grounds, a move that surprised many experts and set a controversial precedent. The tariffs didn't just target economic rivals like China, they also hit close allies in Europe, Canada, and beyond, sparking a wave of global retaliation. The result was a period of heightened trade tensions, uncertainty for businesses, and growing fears of a worldwide economic slowdown. The trade war with China quickly escalated, with both sides imposing tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods. This tit-for-tat battle disrupted global supply chains, raised costs for manufacturers, and left consumers facing higher prices on everyday products. While some U.S. industries like steel saw short-term gains, many others suffered. Farmers lost access to key export markets, automakers faced higher costs for parts, and American families felt the pinch at the checkout line as prices rose. The ripple effects were felt across the economy, from rural towns to big cities. By 2025, Trump's renewed push for protectionist policies reignited fierce debate in Washington. Lawmakers, business leaders, and legal experts questioned whether the president had overstepped his authority, setting the stage for a high-stakes constitutional showdown. The broad and sometimes unpredictable use of tariffs created clear economic winners and losers, deepening divisions within American society. This fueled a legal battle over the true limits of presidential power in shaping the nation's trade policy. Ultimately, it was this far-reaching disruption, and the fundamental question of executive authority, that brought the issue before the Supreme Court, forcing the justices to weigh in on the balance of power between Congress and the president. The court's intervention now marks a pivotal turning point in the ongoing debate over America's trade future, with consequences that will shape the economy, the law, and the presidency for years to come. Trump's tariffs relied on Section 232 of the 1962 Trade Expansion Act, a Cold War-era law allowing the president to restrict imports threatening national security. For decades, this power was used sparingly and narrowly. Under Trump, national security was redefined to justify broad tariffs, even on imports from close allies. Critics argued this was a pretext for protectionism and a dangerous expansion of executive power, bypassing Congress's authority over trade. The Supreme Court agreed to decide, had Congress handed too much power to the president? The legal battle began when steel importers challenged the constitutionality of Section 232 tariffs, arguing Congress had given the president a blank check. Lower courts sided with the administration, citing old precedent and deferring to presidential judgment on national security. But, as tariffs dragged on and economic pain spread, constitutional concerns gained traction. The Supreme Court's decision to hear the case signaled a willingness to revisit the separation of powers. During oral arguments, justices pressed both sides. Does national security mean anything the president says? Where are the limits? The steel importers' question, if Canadian steel is a threat, what isn't, struck a chord. The stage was set for a landmark, ruling on the boundaries of executive power. The outcome would reshape the legal landscape for trade policy. On November 21, 2025, the Supreme Court ruled Section 232 unconstitutional as applied, citing the lack of clear limits on presidential discretion. The majority, led by Chief Justice Roberts, declared that Congress must provide specific standards when delegating power. The term national security was deemed too vague, allowing the president to act as lawmaker. The ruling immediately invalidated billions in tariffs and sent the administration scrambling for alternatives. In dissent, Justice Sotomayor warned the decision could weaken the president's ability to respond to real threats. The court's message: Congress, not the president, must set the rules for trade. Chief Justice Roberts' opinion reframed the issue as a constitutional question, not just trade policy. The court found that allowing the president to regulate the economy under a vague national security standard was an unconstitutional delegation of power. The majority revived the non-delegation doctrine, insisting Congress must write clear, specific laws. Justice Gorsuch, concurring, warned against creating unaccountable executive agencies and called for democratic accountability. The ruling overturns decades of deference to the executive and puts responsibility for trade policy squarely on Congress. Lawmakers can no longer pass the buck to the White House. The decision forces Congress to confront the tough choices of trade policy. It's a forceful reassertion of the legislative branch's constitutional role. The balance of power has shifted, permanently. The Supreme Court's decision will have immediate effects on the U.S. economy and consumer prices. With tariffs on steel and aluminum voided, costs for these metals are expected to drop, benefiting automakers, manufacturers, and consumers. Lower input costs could slow inflation and put money back in Americans' pockets. However, domestic steel and aluminum producers now face tougher competition and possible job losses. The ruling highlights the trade-offs of protectionism. What helps one industry can hurt another. Politically, the fallout in key manufacturing states could be significant. The decision also brings new predictability to trade policy, ending years of tariff uncertainty. Businesses can plan and invest with greater confidence, supporting long-term growth. The shift may encourage more stable economic conditions. For many Americans, the impact will be felt in everyday prices and job prospects. The Supreme Court's ruling made headlines worldwide, sending ripples through global markets and diplomatic circles. For many, it brought a sense of relief and renewed hope for a more predictable and stable U.S. trade policy, after years of uncertainty and abrupt changes. The decision was seen as a pivotal moment, signaling that the United States might be returning to a more traditional, rules-based approach to international commerce. The European Union and North American allies welcomed the decision as a return to rules-based trade and better cooperation. European leaders expressed cautious optimism, hoping this would mark the beginning of a new era of transatlantic partnership and fewer trade disputes. Canada and Mexico saw it as vindication, removing a major irritant in relations with Washington. Their officials emphasized the importance of predictability and fairness in cross-border trade, and expressed hope that future negotiations would be less confrontational. China's response was cautious, viewing the ruling as a sign of internal U.S. division and a potential weakening of Trump's hand. Chinese analysts debated whether this shift would lead to more stable relations or simply new forms of competition and rivalry. The decision signals that American institutions can check executive power, restoring some global trust. For many around the world, it was a reminder that the U.S. system of checks and balances still functions, even in turbulent times. Yet world leaders remain wary, expecting the Trump administration to seek new ways to pursue its agenda. Many are preparing for further unpredictability, knowing that policy shifts could still come from other branches of government. The ruling could embolden Congress to reclaim its authority over trade. Lawmakers from both parties are now debating how to assert their constitutional role, potentially reshaping the balance of power in U.S. trade policy for years to come. The world is watching to see if the U.S. will embrace a more collaborative approach. Allies and rivals alike are closely monitoring Washington's next steps, aware that American decisions will have far-reaching consequences. The next moves in Washington will shape global economic relationships. Investors, businesses, and governments are all recalibrating their strategies, waiting to see if stability will truly return. The era of unilateral U.S. tariffs may be ending, but the debate over America's trade role is far from over. As the world recalibrates, the choices made in Washington will echo across continents, shaping the future of global commerce for years to come. The Supreme Court's decision marks a constitutional turning point, ending the era of unilateral presidential tariffs. Power over trade now returns to Congress, reshaping American politics and the global economy. The Trump administration is expected to seek new legal tools, but the rules have changed. The spotlight shifts to Congress. Will lawmakers craft a coherent trade strategy or leave a power vacuum? For Americans, this is about jobs, prices, and the nation's place in the world. The debate moves from the Oval Office to Congress, demanding public engagement and accountability. The judiciary has checked the executive. Now, the legislative branch must act. The world is watching as America's next chapter in trade policy begins.